Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first authority meeting of 2024. I think it's not too early to just have a final Happy New Year, and looking forward very much to an action-packed year ahead. Firstly, we have apologies from Francis Flinter and Alison Marsden. We're delighted to see our colleagues from the Department of Health and Social Care, Fire Yusuf and Catherine Bainbridge, and please send Steve Pugh our best regards for a speedy recovery. We're also delighted to see Jason Kazri back in a different guise. As you know, Jason stepped down as an authority member earlier this month, but he has kindly agreed to join the board as a special advisor with a particular skill in embryology, and will remain with us until a new member embryologist is appointed. And Jason will also be on SCAC for a year. So thank you, Jason, very much. I'm also delighted to welcome Adrian Thompson to our meeting. Adrian is our board apprentice. The Department of Levelling Up has a new board apprentice scheme. As I mentioned before, these are not 18-year-old school leavers. They are actually senior people who are considering perhaps joining boards as non-execs. And we'd like to get a feel for what being on a board might entail. So Adrian will be shadowing this board and some of the members for the next year. So you're very welcome, Adrian, and nice to see you here. As usual, this meeting is being recorded in the interests of transparency, and the recording will be on the HFEA website after this meeting. And we've got some observers online. You're all very welcome. And also just to note that Tim Child, one of our authority members, is also online today as he's overseas. Right, so firstly, declarations of interest. I think Tim doesn't have a declaration of interest at the moment. I think Catherine, Alison McTavish and Francis, who's not here actually, have previously noted their conflicts. So I think it's just Geeta actually.
I'm a clinician and a license holder in licensed clinic.
Great, thank you, Geeta, very much. So, first item on the agenda, as always, is the minutes of the last meeting and any matters arising. Firstly, does anybody have any comments on the minutes that they wish to raise?
Yeah, yes, if I may. How do I?
Yeah, I turned off and you turn on.
Okay, thank you. It might seem like a minor point, but I think it's important. A minute on page 5, point 5.12. It says PG the chance of having a child with significant hereditary disease. And I think removed is not appropriate because there could still be a chance. I think it's not appropriate to say removed.
Yeah, but you're saying that we should use a different word from remove because it doesn't remove the chance altogether of a disability, you mean?
Exactly. So I would say, significantly reduces or something like that. Because I think that's misleading because there can always be a spontaneous mutation.
Okay. Can we get some of the comments from anybody? Geeta, or actually, Tim, you have your hand up. So can we hear from you?
We're not sure Tim's mic and camera are working at the moment. We're trying to fix it.
He should be able to access it.
Tim is muted, but he should be unmuted. Is it working or not? Geeta? Yeah.
I actually agree with her because it actually clearly says here removes.
Yes.
Which is a definitive statement, which is not correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. So if everyone's happy
We'll find a different.
We'll find a word like significantly reduce or something like that. That's okay. Great. Thank you very much. Any other? Thank you very much. So any other comments on the minutes? Okay, we can take those as approved. And matters arising, there are just two, and I think one is removed as an action because it's completed, and the other one about fees is going to be dealt with in the meeting. So I think there's nothing else under matters arising. Right, so now we come to the Chair and Chief Executive's report. So firstly, I spoke at a couple of conferences earlier this, or in one, the Progress Educational Trust Conference in December, and Fertility 2024, which is the main conference, I believe, for fertility practitioners, really, that happens every year in January. On both occasions, I set out really our proposals for law reform, not in detail, but I highlighted the 4 areas that we were looking at and where more work needs to be done, and really hopefully gave the sector a good overview of where our work is so far and what more work we have to do. This will be a recurrent theme, I think, over this coming year as we continue to rework some of the proposals and add more detail in. It was always hard to know, but I feel that both actually speeches were well received. There was a lot of interest in the sector. People had lots of questions. There were lots of questions, and I think there was a general feeling as this is a really good idea, and when's it going to happen? And I emphasise that this is obviously a matter for Parliament, not for us. But I think there's a sort of groundswell of opinion that this is something that needs some priority, and that was helpful, and we'll continue to work with the department over the course of the year to refine the proposals, I think. I also, last week with Claire, joined the Women's Health Summit event at which the Secretary of State for Health, Victoria Atkins, spoke. It was really a sort of bit of a recap of what they did last year and their priorities for 2024. And although a lot of their work it isn't directly affected, or it doesn't directly affect us, it sits at the side of what we do, and there are definitely areas where we have very common interests. So I think it's important that we keep in touch, and I met the chair, Dame Professor Leslie Reagan, and she certainly said it would be good to keep in touch, and I welcome that. Finally, from me, as members will be aware, General Directions 0007, there was some minor, in regard to that, there's some minor amendments that were circulated on the 5th of January. Because we needed to get those amendments into the most recent issue of Clinic Focus, and there was a deadline, we asked for approval by correspondence, and I'm just noting here for the record that approval from all of you was received. I was very grateful, and that the changes were approved, and the general direction has now been updated. Yeah. And so that's sort of the key activities for me, and I'm now looking at what this year is going to look like, and I'm going to continue clinic visits because I think those were well received last year, and I intend to start them up again fairly soon, and also hopefully to meet with Scottish ministers a bit later in the year in May, when I'm going to Scotland for another conference, because that wasn't, we tried a couple of times, but what with COVID and one thing and another, it didn't work out. So hopefully this time it will, and I'm looking forward to that. So just before I move on, I just want to ask Alison McTavish and Tim if you have anything to add, given that you were at the conferences too and so
on. So I think from my point of view, certainly it was very beneficial having an HFEA presence at the BFS ARCS conference. And I know, Julia, your talk went down well. I think other members of the executive who were there, I think it just helps the sector understand what the HFEA is about and where we, the HFEA, would like to go in the future. So I would encourage more of the same.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, I would agree. The meeting in Edinburgh, I think you were inundated every day. I saw you speaking to some people and caught it at frequent periods throughout the time you were there. I think it really opens up the HFE to the sector and gives them an opportunity to come and speak face to face, which is excellent.
Thank you. And I think it is really important because, you know, showing our face to all these things and really engaging with the sector, I think is already paying dividends. So we will continue to do that. Peter, let me hand over to you.
Thanks, Julia. It was quite a quiet period given we were covering the sort of Christmas New Year break. But two things just to alight on them from that list I think are worth commenting on. On the 4th of December, as it says there, myself and Catherine Seddon, our audit chair, and Tom Scrinner, our finance director, were asked to go before the Department of Health's own Audit and Risk Committee. They have one just like we do. And one of their jobs is to look at the health system as in the round and satisfies themselves that all of those risks are properly being managed. I think that was a productive conversation. Part of it is covered in paragraph 4.5 of the minutes. But what I think it did provide us with a bit of an opportunity to do was not just set out our key strategic risks, but also, I think, to set them in the context of the arguments you've been advancing on law reform, where in particular, I think one of the themes you've been articulating is the sense in which the fertility market itself increasingly is not easily covered by the regulatory regime. And I think the committee very much got that. We also talked to them about the particular risk about epicenter, and I know Tom will pick that up later on when we talk about fees. So I think that was a productive kind of session. And the other thing to say is we held an all staff event on the 12th. We usually have 2 of these a year, and I think they become particularly important in a world of hybrid working, where it's a very good opportunity to bring people together. It's a really positive event, and one of the things I wanted to share with you, the other thing we do is we do an annual staff survey, and we talk to the Audit and Governance Committee about this, but I think it's worth sharing at board level. That's also indicating, some really positive things. And there's absolutely some things we need to pay attention to, which I'll mention in a minute. But our last staff survey had a response rate of about 83%. It's a decent indicator of the health of an organisation that you get a decent response rate, because it sort of indicates that even if they want to make criticisms, they feel it's worth making the effort because they might be listened to. Now, our stat survey is compared to a whole series of other public bodies. And I know that the average for those public bodies was about 70%. And to put it in context, the average response rate in the NHS is about 46%. So a response rate of 83% is an indication of a healthy organisation for starters, even if people have serious things to say to you. What the survey itself uses a sort of algorithm to come to a number of questions and add them up into what they call an engagement score. This is the idea that depending on how staff answer these kind of questions, it gives you a sense about how engaged staff are. Our engagement score, which is a sort of, the extent to which staff feel happy at work, stands at 84%. Which in the context, I think, of workload, public sector austerity, problems over pay, and all the rest of it, is good. That's above the average for public sector comparators, which are probably around about 75, 76%, and it's fractionally above last year's score. About 2/3 of our staff see themselves as remaining with the organisation 2 years out from now. That's about the same as previous years. And I think given the size of the staff, given we've talked before about the impact of pay and the fact that in the public sector generally, and in fact moving is a way to get more pay, that's a reasonably solid figure as well, even though, we have struggled with turnover over the years. And over 3/4 of our staff would recommend the HFEA to their friends and family, comparing with a sector average of about 68%. I don't want to make too much of those differences, but they're significant enough. Generally, the perception of senior management remains high, but it's probably not startlingly different from sector averages. We do have fairly good responses in terms of staff saying they have the right tools and resources to do the job. That's about 72%. I'm not trying to underplay the near 30% of don'ts, but better to be that way around than the other, given the pressures. That's about 5% up on the sector average, about the same. We have a bit more work to do on diversity and inclusion. Difficult to work out from the actual answers to the questions what that means exactly. And indeed, one of the actions we'll be taking from this survey, which again we mentioned at the audit committee, is we need to do a bit of a deep dive into some of that diversity and inclusion findings to really get at what they really mean, because there are all sorts of other evidence of people saying that they feel treated fairly. So we just need to unpack that. But I thought it might be helpful just to share those kind of headlines with authority members. So, there clearly is more work to do. But I think given the broader context and without being complacent, that's quite a reasonable set of figures. So obviously happy to take questions on any of that, or just to hand back to Julia.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. So at every meeting, there we go. And just actually to say, I thought the staff survey results were very encouraging. I mean, clearly there are a few areas where we just need to do a bit more of a deeper dive, but they were encouraging, and we will keep an eye on them, because obviously we need to make sure that during the year we keep those results true and they don't change. So at every meeting, we ask committee chair to report any formal activity of any particular committee since we last met. So Alison Marsden is not able to be with us, and I think Graham is going to report on Licence Committee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did share last week's meeting, and I think it's perhaps worth reporting that of the 4 interim inspections we looked at, 3 related to clinics, which caused the committee quite a lot of time and anxiety last year. And in each case, the interim inspection was excellent in terms of practice and in terms of cooperation with the inspectorate. So it was a pleasing turnaround, really. So it made last year well.
That's very good to hear. Jonathan, on a Statutory Approvals Committee, please.
Thank you. Yes, so you've got the basic figures and statistics from the meetings in the paperwork. Just to give you, as I usually do, a sort of flavour of our meetings, as members will probably remember, if someone applies for PG to a particular condition, the executive and the peer reviewer will consider whether there are other analogous kind of conditions that we might license at the same time. The idea being, if we can license a group of similar conditions, that saves someone having to apply and then wait, and particularly if the evidence is pretty much the same. I think it's the first time we've done this, but the committee has been hearing quite a number of applications recently in relation to conditions that include deafness. All the ones we've considered include deafness and a whole series of other complexities as well. But the committee thought it'd be useful to ask the executive, alongside peer reviewers, to look at all of these series of conditions that genetic conditions concerning deafness as a sort of a big overview that we might be able to license if appropriate those together. Will be that's a major piece of work. That's quite a serious undertaking. But hopefully in the months ahead we'll be able to look at the outcome of that.
So can I just ask you, so that piece of work is going to be driven by the Statutory Approvals Committee and will presumably deliver to us or to let us know how you're getting on and so on?
That's right, yes.
Great. I think it would be very, very useful. There was no SCAP meeting. In fact, the next SCAP meeting will be in the next couple of weeks. But Tim Child and the group did just go up and visit the centre in Newcastle where mitochondrial donation happens. And I think Tim was just going to give a brief overview of the visit.
Yes, so as Julia said, we had no formal SCAC meeting, but 3 authority members and an external advisor to SCAC, plus someone from the executive. So 5 of us travelled up to Newcastle on December the 14th, Newcastle Fertility Centre at Life, to really to hear a presentation from the wider team on their mitochondrial donation programme. And I have to say, we were very pleased with the openness with which we were received, and pretty much the whole team there were involved in talking to us. Now, the feedback from that meeting will be fed back to the next SCAC meeting in February, and then from there to the next authority meeting in March.
Thanks, Tim. And lastly, Catherine for AGC.
Yes, thank you. We scrutinised the latest update of the risk management strategy and the latest iteration of the risk register. And I can assure the authority that there's no current risk without appropriate mitigation. We also considered the question of timing of CAFCA through PRISM. And ordinarily, as you know, we've not been in favour of any increased delay on any part of delivery of PRISM, but we were persuaded to approve the postponement of CAFCA through PRISM to October 2024. And the principal reason for that is because by postponing that short period, we'll be able to supply patients with 3 years quality data rather than 2, which we felt was infinitely in patient interest. So that's why we've approved that. Small update on IT. I just wanted to share with you that we were very pleased to see that Google Alerts are now in place. That internally we will identify the emergence of any fraudulent sites claiming to have access to our register and our registered data, which is obviously very significant in our assistance of both donors and donor-conceived individuals. You've already heard from Peter about the exceptionally positive staff survey, but I also wanted to assure the authority that we continue to look with the executive at ways that we might reduce turnover, which is an ongoing issue for all small ALBs. And I'm very pleased to say that we have a new initiative coming down the line. So watch this space, and I'll report next time on what impact that's having either on staff morale and or on turnover. And last but not least, we did our annual review of our committee effectiveness, and it was broadly speaking very positive, but we still concluded that there were improvements that we could make. So we've now approved a whole series of those, and we've got a timetable, and we'll be monitoring to make sure that we complete those over the next year. Happy to take any questions.
So are there any questions for any of the committee chairs? Yes, Alex.
I just wanted to add that at the last audit committee we had some training on assurance and governance from SIPFA, and it was really good. So just thank you to everyone that organised that for the members.
Okay, and thanks as always to the committee chairs for a great job. And as always, meetings of the committees will take place at stated periods throughout the year, and we'll continue to report on them. So we now come to the performance report, where we invite Peter as CEO and the directors to highlight any key issues in their area, and you will have had the report in advance. So let's start with who will introduce the report and also cover HR matters.
Thank you, Julia. So if you stand back and look at the report, there are 7 green indicators, 4 red, 3 neutral. What, of course, is striking about that picture is the consistency. So we have for some time now faced pressure in a few sort of key areas of the business, of which I think the most significant is the pressure on our inspection team. Rachel can pick up any of the points of detail, but for a number of reasons, not notably a particular sickness as well. The inspection schedule is always busy, is particularly busy at the moment, and the inspection team is under a lot of pressure. And where we have particularly complex inspections, that's when the KPIs dip. So, but they have been consistently below target for some time. We're still under pressure there, and that's just to acknowledge where that is. We are under pressure on things like staff sickness. Although actually that's the general position is improving, but we have an issue with a couple of members on long-term staff leave, which we're actively managing at the moment. But it does skew the statistics. I'm pleased to say, funnily enough, actually, in terms of turnover, there were no leavers in November. I'm afraid to tell you that position will not repeat itself in another month. So it's one of those things that bumps up and down. Turnover is manageable, but it is still higher than is ideal. Turning to PRISM, and Catherine has mentioned some of the key developments there, but PRISM is well established. We've got over 500,000 bits of data in from 104 clinics. The error rate is at around about just over 3%. That's quite a lot lower than it was under the old system. But crucially, a bit less than 1/3 of clinics, 32 to be precise, have errors greater than 4%. This is where our sort of regulatory focus now needs to be put. We have some clinics whose error rate is under 1%. It is not going to be a great morale booster for them if we just keep banging on about error rates in the abstract. They're doing a really great job. We do have 32 clinics whose error rates are higher than average. And they're the ones we'll be focusing our regulatory effort on. And in many respects, the reasons for those error rates vary too, which I think also justifies a slightly bespoke approach. It may well be because of particular system errors with the patient management system they use or what have you. But we are in the middle at the moment of working with identifiable clinics about their particular problem with errors. And that feeds into the Choose a Fertility Clinic update, which Catherine mentioned. Very grateful for AGC in terms of allowing us to push the deadline back a bit. As Catherine said, it really does help. I think when we do get through this first verification, it will mean that patients will have much more up-to-date data, and it's worth the extra effort. Clearly, what we want to avoid, however, is that date slipping again, and that's where all the focus is. And we will, early in February, signalling the start of the verification period for updating this Choose a Fertility Clinic data. As I think I've said before, in many respects, this will be the hardest verification we do, because effectively we are verifying data submitted under the old system in the new system, and that just makes life hard. So this is old data verified through PRISM. Once this particular update is done, we'll be doing PRISM data through PRISM, and that makes life an awful lot simpler. But we are also hopeful, while there is a big historical backlog of data to verify, which makes a big task for many clinics, there are an awful lot of clinics whose data is currently in a very good state indeed. So although there's quite a lot to do, the verification burden may be relatively modest. I'll obviously keep you up to date on that, because Choose a Fertility Clinic up and running again with more up-to-date data is a key strategic aim for the organisation, and is vital with our general aim of trying to put, accurate, impartial data in the hands of patients so they can make informed choices. So this is the final part of the jigsaw of the whole sort of PRISM thing, but it really matters. And I will obviously, we will still report in detail to the Audit and Governance Committee, but we'll rest assured we will let the authority know if we are slipping off that particular timetable. Other thing to just comment on is the 10 family limit. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this, we have a general rule, it's not a law or anything, which is that where donated gametes are used, they are used for no more than 10 families. Now, clearly I use that word advisedly because they are families, not children, because obviously if somebody already has a child and they want another with the same donor, that may mean more than 10 children. But it can be quite difficult. Clinics can find that quite difficult to understand in terms of, because donated gametes are often used in more than one clinic, then being sure that you haven't, how many you might have used, but sometimes it can be quite an exercise to find out how being used elsewhere. So we have got 8 clinics that have volunteered with us to be pilots for a new series of alerts on this. So this is a good concrete example, if you like, of where the whole PRISM data project gives real advantage. Now that the database is in a more modern, stable footing, we are able to play that data back to clinics much more easily. So the pilot, which is due to start in February, will hopefully establish how an alert system will work. In other words, where a clinic is using donated gametes, it will be able to find out easily from us whether or not it is close to that 10 family limit, which will enable the management of that much more easily. So we'll see how the pilot goes, but we have some real hopes for this, and I think this is a significant step forward in terms of using the data we hold to help clinics carry out their sort of regulatory duties. So I'll keep you in touch on that. So that's all I wanted to cover here. And unless anyone has any questions, I think I'm just going to hand over to Rachel. Zainab.
Thanks, Peter. I just had a question about that. That's really interesting, the pilot. And I wondered whether that was just going to be for UK donors or whether it was going to include international donors that are being used in clinics.
It can only include, whether or not the donor comes from internationally or the UK, what we only have information on is the number of times the donation has been used in the UK. So what we can never know is, if a donor donated in France, we don't know how many times those donations might have been used in France. So that's the issue. And of course, we have no international jurisdiction. And in many of those countries, of course, quite a lot of countries don't have their own regulatory scheme either. So there's not even a regulator we could talk to find out. So that's a long-winded way of saying all we can say is how often the donation has been used in the UK, regardless of its source.
I just had a very quick practical question. Just going back to staff sickness, because I know this has been read for many months now. If you take out the 2 or 3 people who are long-term sick, would we say that actually we're where we expect to be in terms of staff sickness generally? Because I know those 2 or 3 do skew the numbers.
We certainly are. So if you strip out employees on long-term sick, our staff sickness rate is 0.48%, which, given where the public sector is generally and the fact we're in the midst of winter coughs and colds, is probably about as good as it's going to be, actually. So yes, our fundamental problem is thankfully a small number of staff with a range of long-term sick problems, which is obviously very bad for them, but also can put pressures on particular teams. But strip that out, and generally we're in quite a good place.
Thank you, Peter. Rachel?
Thank you. So to follow on from what Peter's just said, we do have long-term absence within the compliance team, and in a small team that does have significant impact on their ability to deliver the KPIs and performers that they would like to, but they are doing their best and fulfilling the inspection. And the most important thing is that we don't breach the license terms. So the team are coping, but we are trying to recruit and sort out those issues in the team as soon as we can. Just wanted to mention, you might be aware that there was an independent inquiry that was undertaken in response to the Fuller case, and the recommendations were published in phase 1 of their report. This report, if you've managed to have a read through, it does raise where the concerns were about how they were regulated and how organisations that do regulate interact. So the compliance team has taken this report and in effect we've gone through each of those recommendations and points and looked at how they would be applicable to our regulatory scheme and how we regulate as the HFEA, to see where we do things well and to see if there was any learning points from that. So just for some example, one of the recommendations was that the HTA appears to have viewed various inspections and incidents in isolation. So we looked at how we regulate and we look at how we note non-conformances, how we follow up those, how we set time and action points for those non-compliances. And then also looked at how we interact within the inspection team with regards to whistleblowing, incidents and complaints, and how we feed that into our compliance, the information and intelligence that we have prior to inspection. And we did feel that as a team, especially on that point, that we were quite robust in the way that we acted. So it's just really to make you aware that we've done that piece of work. With regards to the OTR team, fortunately we've had staff turnover again within the team, but the good news is that the case management system that we put in last year is working well and the team like that. We've also just recently started to use the register tools to be able to extract the information, which is the final piece of the jigsaw to be able to be more efficient in the way that we manage those applications. We are recruiting to the officer who has just recently left, and we've also taken on a 12-month temporary position in an officer role that we're going to train in some of the more basic aspects of the application so that we can try and reduce the number of applicants that are waiting, because at the moment that stands at over 1,000 at the moment. We are doing some extra work with Dynamics, so that's just been commissioned just recently to look at how we can manage the different streams in the waiting list so that we can get more information about how long people are waiting, especially now we're using the new systems. So we're going to do that over the next few months, and then we'll be able to break down the applicants into different waiting lists and waiting times. And then just to mention on IT, we're starting work on the DSPT. We do the baseline assessment, and that's due at the end of February. And then we'll be preparing for the submission later in the late spring, early summer. We are having an audit on our business continuity. That's going to be undertaken within this quarter. So we've done quite a bit of work on that. And we continue to do the aspects of looking at how we can prevent cyber crime, such as by doing penetration tests. And the one that we've just recently done on our applications that we've got, we're working through where their vulnerabilities are and putting measures in place. And then we are as well looking at our IT systems. Tom's very helpfully supporting us, trying to look at how we can replace Epicenter, which is the IT system we use for inspection licensing, which is the biggest risk that we've got at the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to share an observation about the Fuller report, in that a number of other regulators in other sectors are really having pause for thought about the central observation that some regulatory regimes confuse licence holders' assertion with assurance. And I just wanted to say that, from my own experience early on in my term of going for a day with one of our senior inspectors, I have absolute confidence that here at the HFEA, we never confuse the boundaries, that we always in our inspections seek the evidence that something is in place and is being properly applied and implemented. And that's not always the case in other regulatory sectors. So I think the public and we all should take a great deal of confidence from that. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That was obviously one of the recommendations that we did look at. And I think the desk-based assessment that we do up front, requesting evidence, helps with the robustness of that we are actually getting assurance, not just being reassured by asking someone for information.
Any questions, other questions for Rachel? Claire.
Thanks. Just a brief update on work in my area beyond that which is in the performance report, which shows, as usual, and credit to the team, a very successful period in licensing despite being very busy. Just before Christmas, we launched the Ethnic Diversity in Fertility Treatment report. We had a wide range of coverage, including some outlets who we hadn't reached before, so that was really good. We think the story that shows that there's a nearly 10% difference in success rates for Black patients is something that everyone should be joining our call to action to ensure that changes. As you know, we published a call to action on the same day together with the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the British Fertility Society and Fertility Network UK. And I'm delighted to say that since we published that, the Royal College of General Practitioners has also joined that call to action, which is really great, and hopefully we'll be working together with them going forward. We had a so-called soft launch of the new fertility dashboards just before Christmas, and we've already had a good deal of interest, and there will be a bigger push for that, particularly on social media next week. If this is a world first in terms of fertility data dashboards, encourage everyone to use them and promote them, and we'll send you some more information on that. We have a steady flow continuing of both public inquiries, FOIs and media inquiries. The most common media inquiry we're getting at the moment is about egg freezing, particularly about advice, guidance and success rates, as well as wider issues including funding, issues around including that obviously there's a big ITV programme, Born from a Same Stranger, which started this week. And also the occasional article which is promoted as a great advance that's going to resolve everything in terms of new treatments for patients, which kind of when we're asked to look into it and ask for comment. And thank you to Tim and Geeta and Jason and others who often help us with this, that unfortunately the headline about the kind of this is the answer to all fertility issues and the facts are not always lined up. Lastly, thank you to Rachel and also to Molly Burnett, who is an apprentice in our communications team. So that's the first apprenticeship we've had in our comms team. And Molly organised our first Instagram Live, so possibly took Rachel out of her comfort zone. But for anyone who wants to watch that at leisure, that's saved on the HFEA official Instagram channel, and I think is probably something we will do more frequently. And there's been some really positive feedback on that. So the other members of the team, apart from doing the kind of majority of the work, which is business as usual, are completing some of those big pieces of work from this business year. So the opening the register of communications work, which we'll talk about in a minute, finalising the last bit of the add-ons work, the publishing the code of practice, which took place at the end of autumn last year, and the consent forms that will be published as a result of that, and planning the next stages of the work on law reform, as well as looking to our data publications in 2024-25 including the next fertility trends, which hopefully will be published late in the spring or early summer.
Any questions for Claire? Geeta.
Just a comment, really. Well done to your team. Ethnic disparities report was very well received. The launch got moved. If not, I think we would have got better coverage. As you say, there are still outlets that could cover that. It was also widely published nation media as well. So I think there's been a lot of attention to that. Has been quite good. And also about egg freezing. I think, isn't egg freezing one of the third common visits on the website? I'm really pleased to see that. That's exactly what we want. We want them to go to the HFEA website when they're thinking about egg freezing. Well done on that. Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you. So as per the paper, the 23-24 financial position at the end of November, we were forecasting a year-end deficit of £122,000. This is broadly similar, slightly worse than the position that we showed you last time, which was at the end of September, where we were at around £91,000 deficit. This deficit is still very much driven by rising IT costs and the pay increase this year, as well as IVF activity is slightly lower than we were expecting, so our fee income is also slightly lower than we were expecting. We just completed a Q3 kind of review, more detailed review that's given the rise to a number of changes that I thought were probably worth outlining here. The most significant is fully recognising a deduction in our grant in aid that was made by the department. It was actually made at the beginning of the year, but it's taken us a while to understand the basis of the deduction and to confirm that they calculated it correctly. We're still kind of contesting the principle of the deduction with them, but we've recognised this in our accounts, and this is a reduction in our income of around £100,000. So along with this and a couple of other changes, particularly there's been some reduced forecasts around some of our internal project spend and a couple of other changes. Our position at the end of December is a deficit of 138,000. So actually, considering the size and reduction of grant and aid, it's not a huge amount worse. It could have been worse. We've managed to find some savings. So I've discussed this position with the department, with finance in the department. They're fairly comfortable with the position that we're in. They've not asked us to undertake any particular actions. So we're going to carry on, try and maintain it broadly where we are, and potentially get some of that grant and aid back if we can get those arguments through. Looking to 24-25, so the fee increase that was agreed by the board in November, that's currently with Treasury going through approval. We've been answering a few questions, so hopefully that will be finalised fairly soon. As you remember, we also had a grant and aid bid to support investment in the Epicenter system, the licence management system. That's with the department as well, and we've been engaging with Department Finance on this. We've also been engaging with Department Commercial as well, who've agreed to kind of help us do the procurement once we've got finalisation on the funding. My concern around this is very much one of timing. I think going through departmental business planning, we're probably not going to hear back until sometime in February. I think we've got quite a good chance of getting the funding, because I think it's clear that it's a fairly urgent investment requirement. But if the answer is no, and that's near the end of February, it doesn't give us a lot of time to kind of change our plans, particularly as I think one of our options would be to look at funding Epicenter through fees, which would be difficult to do that late in the day. So we just kind of need to play that one by ear and see when the decisions come through. I think that's it, actually. Sorry. Are there any questions?
I mean, I just to tell you, really just, and it may be too soon to answer this, but I mean, are we thinking about a sort of plan B? I mean, we're hoping we will get funding for the Epicenter work, and it really is very key. But presumably we do need to have a think about what happens if we don't get it, because as you say, timing is really tight.
I think the problem is the only plan B that we can really think of is increasing fees. And if we increase fees by £5 per IVF, that would pay for about half of our requirements for Epicenter. And it would also make our fee kind of, it would make our fees a bit lumpy. We'd end up probably having a bit too much in future years if we made such a big jump this year. So it's a tricky one. But that is our main plan B.
Well, I mean, I think, we'll just keep Peter will keep me informed, and I'll keep the board informed of anything. And I think it's a bit of crossing our fingers about this, but and looking at end of the table, sort of anything we can do to help, because I think this makes a lot of sense, and it's really important we do this piece of work. Yep.
I think just to add, I mean, I don't think anybody, in fairness, in the department thinks that the work we need to replace Epicenter is not essential. And I think everybody's also of the view that some kind of increase in permission to spend, or whether via grant and aid or not, is the best way of funding what otherwise is, to use the jargon, a kind of lumpy bit of expenditure. In other words, we need a sum of money for a relatively short period of time in order to buy a new IT. We don't need an ongoing income stream, which is why fee income is not very satisfactory at all. But the wider pressures on the health system's funding position more generally, and the department, because of that, just means that resolving what is a small discrete decision is difficult because of the wider position. And that gets into Tom's handling timing problem. So we're not having a discussion with the department, which is, if you like, an unresponsive discussion, or they don't see the merits of the argument. But in fairness to them, they're trying to resolve 101 other issues at the same time. And that's the kind of issue. So it's less about, we don't see the case for this, and more about it needs to take its place in amongst 101 other conversations. But we'll obviously keep the board up to date, because I think we're all of the view that a fee increase is just not the way to fund one-off bits of IT expenditure.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody for the update. I mean, I think we're in very good shape at the start of the year. However, as you've heard from all members of the exec, we are resource constrained, both not only financial but also people, because there's a lot of stuff that we really want to do, but we are limited, and we do have a couple of challenges in one or two departments with long-term sickness and under-resourcing and so on, and we have to bear that in mind. Given that, it brings me to our next item, which is our draft business plan for this year. Now, as you will recall, our strategy was due to end in 2024, but given the pressures of COVID and of the work we did on legislative reform, and very, very busy last year, we agreed to run the strategy for another year, and we are actually have already started work on looking what strategy 25-28 would look like. That means that we've got 24-25 with a sort of existing strategy, and we now have to look at the business plan that will come up, that comes out of that strategy, and really decide on what our planning priorities are going to be for this year. And you'll have seen the business plan in your pack, and we need to look at priorities and what needs further developments over the coming months. So I'm going to ask Shabir to give us an overview, and then we will need to make a decision.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, I think it would be helpful to just provide the planning cycle for the business plan. So this is the authority item where the main section of the business plan will be discussed and approved. The next stage will be completing the rest of the business plan, and then submitting it to the department, which will happen sometime between February and April, followed by a publication from the department. So the business plan itself, it only contains the main bulk of the plan for the next financial year. So these were the main priorities that from within that plan. So family formation work, we've already mentioned. The report for that will be has been penciled in for some point in late summer 2024. The work on the OTR support services will commence based on the authority decision today. There's a separate item for that today. Epicenter has already been discussed. It's a major piece of work which will commence at some point during the year. There's also the implementation from EUTCD changes, so that'll come through at some point. The new Kafka will be published in late 2024 using PRISM data for the first time. We'll continue our work on the law reform proposals, commence work on our fees review, and as Julie's mentioned, the new strategy for 2025 to 2028. The work on that's already started, and that'll get finalised during the next year. And the last item is the recommendation from the Public Bodies Review, the implementation of those recommendations. The fees review is the biggest item within that recommendation. So open up to the authority for questions.
Catherine. Thank you. I think those strategic priorities look absolutely right. And to be clear, they're not in order of priority, are they? One of the things that I personally would like to see quite high in a list, if we were prioritising it, is the continuing work on the law reform proposals. And so I'd particularly like to know whether we envisage that we could complete that within the next year, not least so that in the aftermath of an election, if we were to get a go-ahead, I know it's not particularly likely that it would be so quickly, especially with primary legislation, but if we were to get at least a partial go-ahead, we'd actually be ready to go.
That's a good challenge, Catherine, one that keeps us up at night. So I think on the paper, we talk about the first aspect actually of the activities was about developing aspects of the law reform proposals. And as you remember, of the proposals we made, there are some that need further work, and the ones that we are proposing to you today that you'll see in the proposed business plan to focus our energies primarily, but that's not to say the others wouldn't appear at all, in 24-25 are those relating to patient safety and protection, particularly the ones where there's a lot to learn from other regulators, like different models of regulation, potential financial penalties, and the new scientific developments encompassing what a new model, a legislative model, would look like in terms of parliamentary accountability, but also overlapping with the wider work, particularly of SCAC and the scientific policy team on artificial gametes and embryo-like models, which are very much up the agenda. So hopefully that gives you some confidence that we are driving forward, particularly in those areas. I think both in discussion internally and at SMT, we've felt that of the other two areas where we needed to do further work, the first being consent and the second about future anonymity of donors at the time of the birth of a child. Consent one is something that I think that we are in agreement with the sector that at the moment, although consent remains, as people always say, the cornerstone of the Act, it can be cumbersome and perhaps overly complicated. But that is quite a kind of internally focused piece of work that we think can be done in future years together with the sector. And the second one, looking at aspects of donor anonymity, we really felt that after the attention that that's had, both kind of the wider UK, the media and social media, as well as the HFEA in the run up to the release of information in 2023, that we felt that needed to settle a bit. We needed to see how things are. There's been quite a diverse reaction even to that ICB programme earlier in the week about people who are looking for their donors through DNA testing and other sites, that we really felt that that was something that just needed to settle a bit. However, I would say, and Peter can contradict, if there was an election tomorrow, I would feel quite confident that we can present a very coherent piece of work that could be introduced fairly quickly, notwithstanding that although our policy direction might be quite straightforward, the legislation is bound to be quite complicated.
Thank you. That very good question, Catherine. Good response. When we say that we started doing the work in the law reform, have we engaged with the sector so that we can actually work on this together rather than working it separately? Because I'm aware there is work happening in the sector. And I think from the very beginning, if we can work together, then we might make progress quicker and find areas we can agree on and areas we may just not agree on.
Absolutely. And we had really good engagement, not only on the legislative reform advisory group, which had representatives of all the professions within the sector, but also some very detailed responses to our public consultation and ongoing conversations with people like the British Fertility Society. So I think that absolutely is a priority going forward.
The fees review, I don't know whether that's you've got it down for summer 2024. I don't know whether the shape of that is already decided or what terms of reference it will have, but it seems to me it could become a vast thing, or it could be quite closely managed in-house. And I just wonder what the scale of it is going to be.
You're right, Graham, that there's tunes you can play on this. So what we've got at the moment, so I think it's important just to distinguish between what you agreed a couple of months ago was to put the fees up, but to leave the regime unchanged. The fees review, which we are going to start later in the next business year, but certainly not look to complete, is a much more first principled look as what should the regime look like. And it's entirely possible we could conclude that the status quo, or something that looks quite a lot like the status quo, is the kind of best of available options, or we could end up proposing quite radical change. So certainly the work we're going to do later on this year, I think, is going to stand back. This will be an internal piece of work to start with, trying to identify, what are those kind of basic models. And I think, if you look at other regulatory regimes as well, Tom and I could sketch those out quite quickly, actually, at a basic level. We then need to support that work with analytical work, which sort of says, OK, well, if you understand the model that looks like that, do the numbers add up? Because in the end, we need to bring in a sufficient sum of money that actually allows us to run the business. And then I think what we need to do is to define which of those sort of principled models look like the front runners. And that would probably be the basis for some kind of public engagement, because I think it's right and proper that in a regime whereby, we are levying a fee on regulated entities, they should have some say in that. And there will be trade-offs. And some of that will be identifying, winners and losers and the like. But the sorts of issues, and the other thing we'll want to ask a question about, which is relevant to us and clinics, is the ideal model is one that fairly apportions the cost of regulation, but does so at the minimum administrative effort. You could end up with a sort of extraordinary precise scheme that brilliantly identifies the cost of regulation, but is so administratively baroque that it actually costs a lot of money for both us and the clinics to live with it. So, and it may well, one of the virtues of the scheme we've got at present is it's well understood, it's administratively simple. And that's quite a lot got going for it. One of the disadvantages of the scheme we've got at present is that if you look at the way the market's changing, simply using the point of embryo transfer as the trigger for a payment doesn't really reflect the cost of regulation. So, for example, all of those costs involving things like freezing are not remotely met, and so on. So that in summary is the task. Part of our job will be to do a decent, thorough review, if you like, without it becoming an enormous piece of work, because it doesn't need to be. Is that a fair summary, Tom, of the task? The task is easier to explain than it is to do, of course.
No, I think that's right. I mean, we need to cover our costs. Our costs are to regulate the sector, and the sector needs to pay for that. We need to come up with a various way of doing it. And you're completely right. I think there's a big scale of accuracy that kind of goes against complexity, and also the simpler it is, the more predictable it is, and there's value in predictability from planning for us as well as for the sector. So, yeah.
I come back on that. I agree with all that and understand it. I mean, what strikes me though is that we talk about transparency and we want people to understand what fees are due, but at the same time there's a transparency about what those fees are paying for, and it seems to me we're focused on quite a narrow means of fee income, which is itself variable. I mean, I'm just struck by the reduction in IVF cycles at the beginning of the year, and yet we're paying for things which to us are not variable in that. So there are some real disadvantages, it seems to me, in our present fee structure. Not that I can immediately come up with something that's better.
Not to prolong it too much, because we'll need to get into proper options appraisal with you, but you're absolutely right, Graham. So, the simplest model at the other end of the scheme is just to say there is a yearly licence fee for being regulated. And so long as we know how many clinics there are, we just simply times divide the total amount of income we require by the number of clinics, and you end up with a sum. Whether or not that's fair, that a clinic, say, 100 times, one clinic 100 times bigger than another should be charged the same fee, is a different question. So then you get into, should you have a license fee that varies according to the size of clinic, say, and so on. So, there are a number of fairly established models we can play. But you're right that one of the disadvantages with the current model is that there's an element of unpredictability about it. And running a business when you don't quite know what your income is, it makes the task inherently harder. But that'll be part, that's some of the discussions we'll be having with you in the second half of this coming business year.
And just before we move to the decision, I just want to come back to the work on law reform and Alison's question. There are these 4 areas where we need more work, and Claire's outlined the timetable. I mean, it's, of course, I find it's a little frustrating because, now we've sort of announced it, we've talked about it, we actually want to get on with it. And honestly, of all the deluge of questions I had at Fertility 2024, the main question was, so when is this going to happen? Because we think it's a really good idea. The problem is that the areas we're looking at are complex, and if we had unlimited resources and people, then we could all look at them much quicker, but we've got all the other stuff to do on the slide, and that is an issue. I think Peter and the exec are working hard to try to see, what we need to prioritise within that work and how quickly it can be done. But we do need to do it, quickly. I also think that working, or at least speaking to some of our stakeholders like the BFS sooner rather than later, it's something that they have said that they would like to do. I think that's a really good idea, because it would be good that everybody was in, even if we don't all agree with everything, we're all in the same direction of travel. But it's going to be quite challenging. But I think everybody wants this done as soon as is practically possible, but there are limits.
So I just wondered if I could say something about things that aren't law reform focused. Just on page 43 of the papers, there's some other priorities. So 90% of our staff's time is business as usual, but there are some other really exciting activities there, especially moving to a business as usual model for PRISM. But I digress. The fourth bullet point about an impact of AI and new scientific developments. This has very much been subsumed within the work of SCACers, is rightly so, but I think that in 24-25 that needs to kind of be brought back into the mainstream work of the HFEA, including being discussed at authority meetings. Further down, we have plans for the third HFEA National Patient Survey, and people will remember the really large representative sample that we had last time and how that really helped feed into both our work and our regulation of clinics, as well as our quite successful patient engagement forum, which currently has about 200 members, but is not from a very diverse range of people. And we're going to be recruiting. We've given people a 2 or 3 year, I don't want to call it a term of office because that sounds more official, membership. And we're going to be recruiting for a new set of members later in the year. And lastly, or second last, the development of dashboards. So as I said in my performance report earlier, we're launching the dashboards that we currently have next week. But that's only the start. And next year is really about how those can, the data we have can be used to help inspectors much more with the compliance side. And that's really the start of some very, I think, exciting work about what can be done with our data. So I just don't want to lose sight of some of the really exciting things and important things that we have planned for the next year.
It was to echo that. Claire's made some very important points there, and it was just to say, rest assured, we are acutely aware of the need to make as rapid progress as we can on law reform as possible. We will be carving out within the resources we've got, the maximum to do that. And this may not be a consolation or at all, but I've taken 2 bills through Parliament. This is my specialist mastermind subject. So rest assured, I do know what's required in order to get one in a state, or rather the discussion that's required with the department in order to get a set of proposals in a state that were a government to start to move on this, we would be in a good place. And it seems to me we've got a trajectory that gets us to that.
I think that is a consolation, and I think we really appreciate it. And I also think that Claire's completely right. There is the problem is that you can't. If law reform was all consuming, there would be lots of very exciting other things that couldn't get done. So it's a balance. It's a balance. But I think everybody recognises that underpinning almost everything we do will be an up-to-date and modernised piece of legislation, and that is really key. So I think it's a message that doesn't need to be reiterated, and everyone's got it. So, Shabir, after all that, you actually want a decision for us, which is to approve the main section, which you've seen, of the business plan for 24-25 for further development over the next 2 or 3 months. So can I see everybody on the authority happy? Thank you very much. Anybody unhappy? Tim, that's okay. Great. Lovely. Thank you very much, all, and thank you very much, Shabir. That was really helpful. Now, the item that we always come back to, 2023 was a key year for opening the register, and in recognition of that, we have an update on its progress at every meeting, which is now Claire and Rachel.
Okay, so as Julia's just said, we have an update at each one of these meetings on the 3 different work streams that we've been undertaking for the OTR project. My part of this will be quite short because I've actually informed you in the performance report about where we are with the OTR service. So we have successfully implemented the case management system and had very much positive support from that. And we've also gone on to test the RETA reports and have started using those this week. So we're in a good place with the IT systems, and we've got future plans for improvement. But we've come to a conclusion on that. So the next part of it was the support service, which we gave an update of the work that we'd done in November, a detailed PowerPoint presentation to you. And because we've got a paper following this agenda item, I will leave that for now and hand over to Claire.
Thanks. I don't have a huge amount to add other than that which is in the paper and on the presentation. I think we had a hugely successful September to December on the Who Is My Donor campaign, including a massive increase in visits to our website and successful viewings of the FAQs for clinics. We have consciously slowed down the activity that we planned from January to March this year because of the increase of applications and inquiries to the OTR team and the pressure that that would put that small team under. So we've got some things planned, including we had recently the Instagram Live and some other things you'll have seen on our social media in light of the big ITV series that started this week. We've promoting the existing material that we've got on our website, but we are monitoring that and looking at how we continue to engage content through the next few months, but without overloading the OTR team. I think moving on, the risks, some of them we've downgraded, especially the one that was clinics sort of not knowing what to do and what was expected to them, for a few reasons. One is that we've done quite a lot of clinic information, both through Clinic Focus, Special Edition Clinic Focus, special pages and FAQs on our clinic-facing website. Rachel did a range of webinars for clinic staff. I can't remember how many at the last count, but and offered to do many more. Whoever wanted to contact her was offered that in Clinic Focus. So I think the risk of clinics being unprepared, we've lowered. The reputational risk continues, and I think some of the things we see in the media not always accurate about our role. But I think we're managing them to the best of our ability at this point. I suppose the only other thing I wanted to say, if that's okay, Julia, that the work streams that we've been monitoring and bringing to the authority are largely coming to a close in the end of this financial year. So the communications will largely become business as usual. The work stream that developed the new software and staffing model for the OTR team will be business as usual. And the support services, obviously, a discussion later on the agenda. So Rachel and mine, or I, proposal is that the March authority meeting is probably, as suggested the last time, we bring an update like this on the separate work streams to you. And after that, the monitoring of the OTR performance would be through the performance monitoring report that we do at every authority meeting, but not to have a separate agenda item unless something particularly arises.
Thank you, Claire and Rachel. Yeah, that makes sense. And what authority members, are you happy with that? Yeah, and presumably if anything crops up, yes, then you can always deal with it. Can I ask a question? You may not know the answer, actually, but there's been this plethora of TV and radio, also sort of documentaries or docudramas. Do you think they've made a lot of difference to the applications we receive or the way people think about what we're doing? I mean, have they had any sort of effect?
I think directly after some of those, we do see, I think the day we launched the Who Is My Donor campaign, and Egg Donor came forward immediately, having seen that to lift their anonymity. So we do see kind of some direct results. We see the increased spikes to our website as well, but we also see kind of a general discussion about issues. So on the back of the programme on Monday night about people who are pre-2005, born from donors pre-2005, so they aren't able to apply for us for information. There's a discussion that's going on in some of the kind of tabloid and other newspapers about whether it's ethical for people to use DNA testing websites to trace their donor when those donors had no idea at the time that they could ever be traced. Now, obviously, this is beyond our kind of statutory remit. I should say that the majority of those programs are people that we have spoken to. They've come to us to ask for information. They've got our data. They don't always name check us on screen, but they have come to us to check their facts before they've started commissioning those programs.
Just to add to that, I think one of the positive points from the campaign has also been at the clinic level as well. So I've had a lot of good feedback that this has really raised the understanding of what the opening the registered service is for those at the clinic level. And the talks that I've given, like with Geeta and the other big groups, you know, when you come away from that and they know, then if somebody phones up and says, I'm a donor, you know, how do I find that information? They know where to signpost. And clinics said that, you know, what's been in Clinic Focus, what's been on the news has really helped them understand what we do at the HFEA with regard to release of donor information.
Thanks. Interesting. Right, so we are a little ahead of ourselves, but we do have a really important issue to discuss and ultimately make a decision on regarding support services in relation to OTR. So what I propose is we have literally a 5-minute comfort break now. Everyone just sort of shake themselves down, get another cup of tea, and we resume at 2:15, just over 5 minutes, and carry on then. Okay. So everybody online, there'll just be a 5-minute break. Now, we've got a very important discussion and a decision. As you may recall, at our last meeting in November, we had an update on the work that was underway to review the support service that's been available to OTR applicants over the last few years. And you will have seen the paper, which gives us various options to consider about the future of support services. And Anna is here and is going to take us through the paper, and then we can discuss it. Anna, thank you.
Hear me now? Yeah, okay. So thank you, Julia. Yeah, so I'm going to report in a bit more detail on the work that we have done over the last year. I'm going to keep it quite short because I'm assuming that you've all read the paper, and this is just a bit of background to remind everyone. So you'll remember that in November 2022, the authority decided to consider the role that it should play going forward in providing support. As you know, the number of OTR applicants is expected to go up from 2023 onwards, and that's going to impact demand for and therefore the cost of a support service. Working on the basis that any future model of support, any role that the HFEA plays, it needs to be affordable and sustainable. That's the basis of the review. And as Julia said, I gave a quick update in November last year on where we'd got up to. It should be it. So this is just a brief summary of the work that we've done this year. So we did a review of the support provided in other countries of this nature. We also looked into different funding arrangements, different cost recovery models, and explored the pros and cons of those. We did quite extensive stakeholder engagement. So we did stakeholder roundtables in June. We had 2 patient organisations and then one with professionals and academics. We also ran a survey of donor conceived people and donors and parents of donor conceived people and people close to them to get their views. And then just at the very end of last year, we did some costings work looking at the costs of providing support in the future. So these 2 slides are just going to recap on the options that we've set out in the paper. And so this slide, these are the options that we aren't recommending. Option 1 was essentially a continuation of the status quo. And as you know, that's not sustainable. We can't continue to fund the support service from the HFEA core budget, given the increase in demand going forward and the increase in the cost. Option 2, there's more detail in the paper. So this is broadly a model in which we might charge applicants to access support. So we'd commission the service and then aim to recover the cost from applicants. 2 versions of this model. So one in which all applicants pay something towards support, which would then cross-subsidise the support service. As I've explained in the paper, that's challenging given, there are certain issues with compliance around Treasury guidance. And then the other version of this model would be to just charge a fee only to those who access support. And that turns out to be very expensive to the user. and more expensive, in fact, than private sector counselling. So both would involve a number of practical challenges, and bearing in mind that this isn't part of the HFEA's statutory functions, we aren't recommending either of those options. Thank you. Yeah, so move on to the options that we're saying that we should consider, or we would like you to consider. Option 4 would involve significantly expanding and improving HFEA offer on information and signposting, which would give us, there would be some benefits to that, would give us opportunities to tailor materials to a wide range of needs, different groups. We could work with stakeholder organisations and experts, and I've said a bit more in the paper about what that might involve, some of the possibilities, so maybe making videos or commissioning articles, interviews, that kind of thing. And the aim would be for the HFEA to become a trusted source of credible, high quality information, and a place that people could go to with confidence about the information that they're accessing. And then option 5, so this would be to bring the letterbox service, which is currently provided by the Hewitt Centre in-house at the HFEA. So the letterbox service, to recap, that allows donor-conceived people and donors to message each other anonymously in the first instance without exchanging contact details. And there's no private equivalent of the letterbox service. That would be something like distinctive that the HFEA could offer, and there's a possibility of potentially integrating it into the broader OTR service. So we're saying we should consider that. And I'm just flagging as well at the end that the option 3, which haven't missed out, it's something that we might want to consider doing. So that's expanding or adding something to our code of practice guidance for clinics. And we concluded this wouldn't be effective on its own, but it is something that perhaps could work in combination with options 4 and 5. So that's something to think about. And I think that's all I wanted to say, really, just to frame the discussion and open it up to questions and comments.
Anna, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's start comments. Catherine.
Thank you, Jana. I thought it was an excellent paper. Very good and fair and comprehensive evaluation of the pros and cons of each of the options. Entirely clear, so thank you. I'm very strongly in support of option 4. I do think that we ought to build up the resource base that we've got on the website, and I like all of the suggestions that you have put forward. I've got 3 comments about that, and then something about option 5. So could we think about making that package of information something more attractive and or user friendly, particularly for young donor conceived individuals? And I was wondering about the HFEA support app for DCIs and the HFEA support app for donors, for example. But it may well be that we need to think more broadly about other media in which we might want to use to populate this package of information. The other thought that I had was to look to see whether any of our fellow regulators, possibly not within health, but actually in other sectors, might have already gone towards developing such information facility. And if so, whether we could benefit from not reinventing the wheel entirely. And my third thought was about picking up on your point about using young people to develop and test proposed packages. I think that's excellent. But could we just make a particular point of focusing in on the multi-layered service need that came out very strongly from the consultation? And my comment in relation to option 5, with which I'm also very much in support, is that that's bringing the letterbox service in-house. I agree with that, but do we need to be cautious in order to future-proof it? In other words, future-proof if the demand, which at the moment is low,
were significantly to increase because of what we're having to do with the withdrawal of other pre-support services. So, for example, should we consider saying that we will trial bringing it in-house for a period of time, but we need perhaps to flag that should demand increase, it may be necessary for us to reconsider that position.
Rachel.
Just wanted to say thank you to everyone, because this really has been a combined effort through many different areas of the organisation to bring this paper together. But just to answer some of your questions to start with, I think developing it over time and looking how we can attract and be more attractive for different audiences is important. We've got a good website at the moment. This is something that we could do at the moment with the pages that we've got in our website, but certainly any further develop from that would have to be costed and become part of a different project perhaps. Claire might have some thoughts on that, but we would utilise the web pages currently that we've got on the website and do a lot more attractive and different types of communications on there that hopefully would be useful to all the different groups who might be assessing that. With regard to the letterbox service, there aren't high numbers currently that have used it. I think there was only 15 that have used it in the last couple of years. So that may increase with the removal of anonymity, but that is certainly, would be a good idea if we did decide to take that on, to do it on a trial basis to start with.
Graham, and then Alison.
I think this is an excellent paper, and we've moved on enormously from the first discussions that we had, where I think we were focused mainly around counselling we were talking about, and to move into support services where counselling is a feature seems to me to be exactly the right direction to go in. My instinct is that with more and more donor conceived individuals discovering who their donors are, you will have a growing number of people who will want to help others who are in that position. So I don't think it's just a service in a sense that we will need to provide, and I see that in a way reflected here. There was just one thing, I'm interested, it was so low. There's one thing I was going to raise about the letterbox service, which I think is a valuable additional level of support and may well grow. I just wonder what the experience of it is, because it does need monitoring, I would have thought, so that you know what people are saying to each other. Is there any possibility of interpretation? Or do you leave it entirely to the people themselves to exchange their messages? Because I can sense in that position sometimes people express themselves badly on paper and can be misunderstood. And it's whether it's a completely non-interventionist service or whether there is the possibility that whoever in the HFEA might be in touch with each person to interpret what is being said to each other, because I think that's another form of support that could be really valuable. And if that was on offer, it might mean the letterbox service was even more used.
Do you think you have moderating? I think what we might do in the first instance is find out a bit more about how the HEWET has run the service up to now and what kinds of issues it presents. And there are issues, I think, for the HFEA to consider, in addition to some that you've mentioned around information governance and data protection. But we've also heard in the survey that the letterbox was considered to be quite important for safeguarding for people that are so it's a question about giving away identifying details, but it's a good point, and I'm not sure what the answer is to what role the HEWET might play at the moment in terms of content, but it's something I think we would want to speak to them about. Do you agree, Rachel? I'm sorry.
yes, it was a relatively new system that the Hewitt put in place, and there was feedback originally that it was going well, but certainly that's something, if it is agreed, we need to firstly decide how we're going to resource it, and then how we take that in-house and how we manage it, and protocols and system will be built up around that. And we'll also obviously take advice about data protection and how, if there was any difficult messaging, how we would take a view and stance on that within the HER team.
Thank you. This is a great place that we've found ourselves in, and I think option 4 and 5 is absolutely the way to go. And I think actually some of the work has been done. The collaboration with organisations, for example, the 5 leaflets animating that are on the website are absolutely brilliant. So that piece of work is kind of done. The signposting to change counsellors, the UK Donor Conceived and the Donor Conception Network. Obviously, if the Hewitt's fallen away, they will have to secure funding to keep those organisations going. So I think it would actually help them if we're endorsing that would be a place for people to go to secure funding in the future. And I think the TV programme that started the other night will also help quite a bit. So certainly 4 is by far the best way to go. And I think with the issue of the letterbox, we'll have to be careful with the confidentiality, because obviously if the Hewitt's removed, then who does, for one of the charities to pick up something as important as the letterbox, I don't think that would be appropriate. HFEA have got strong data protection and confidentiality, so I think it really should come to HFEA. Also financially, there may be issues in the future, but I think by that time you'll have built up some knowledge and skills and experience as to how best to use it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jonathan, and then Peter, Tim, and then others. I don't worry, I won't forget anybody.
I was going to raise a very similar point to Graham's, really, but a concern about safeguarding and the misuse of the letterbox system, and therefore the need of moderation. But I think it seems you've got those concerns.
I have to say, sorry, apologies. I echo my colleagues. It's absolutely a brilliant paper. There's so much detail in it, and everything is taken into account. I was almost looking at equality impact assessment to try and see if I could find any gaps, and no gaps at all. It's so beautifully assessed as well. And so well done to the team who's put this paper together, including that equality impact assessment survey. My preferred option would be option 4. Catherine has articulated it, and we have discussed about potential issues with option 5 as well, and the fact that it's expanding information and online information, which is going to be very useful, and it's how widely we communicate this. It would be important, because I was a bit disappointed to note that in the ITV program that I saw that for further information, HFEA wasn't mentioned in that particular program. So we really need to communicate this as widely as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, excellent paper. Very clearly shows the huge amount of work that's been done, particularly over the last year or so, and more. I think personally, option 4 to me looks the best option, particularly with the, as is mentioned in the paper there, and verbally, the expansion of the signposting and the support service, the online support services, and from that perspective, I mean, I think the letterbox is interesting. I suppose I don't really understand. In the paper, it mentions relatively small numbers of people have been using it. Whether overall it would be beneficial, and I think if it's going to happen, it would need to stay within the HFEA. I think it would be something that, because of the confidentiality side of things, we would have to take on. Whether it would be widely used enough to warrant taking it on, or whether it's more just signalling that we're making an effort. I need to balance those two things up, really. I mean, the cleanest approach, I guess, would just be to stick with option with option 4. I suppose I'd like to understand a bit more about really what the benefits are and how widely used the letterbox system would be. So maybe a slight addition of that as well.
Thanks, Tim.
I can say a bit more about the letterbox and why we might want to seriously consider doing that. So I've indicated that the counselling service currently provided by the Hewitt is something that could be, counselling is accessible in the private sector, so it wouldn't be that there was no counselling anywhere that anyone could access, and the same is true of facilitated meetings. These can be facilitated by counsellors, but the letterbox service is a distinctive service that can't be accessed elsewhere. Another aspect is that it would, so I've said a bit in the paper about sort of mitigating against some of the potential negative impacts of withdrawing a service that we have been providing up to now, and there would be some gains potentially to be able to show that that the full range of services hadn't completely disappeared, so there isn't anything that is left over that can't be accessed at all. The numbers are quite low at the moment. I think, as we've already discussed, we need to monitor and see how that develops. It might be, so the letterbox service is something that hasn't been promoted proactively for a very long time. I think my understanding is that systems and protocols for delivering the letterbox service were only finalised in the last couple of years. So it could be that it's used more in the future. That's something of a double-edged sword. I think we'd need to make sure that we could resource providing it, but also make sure that it's useful. So I think potentially adopt, if it was something that we were going to adopt, it would be important to do so on a trial basis as a pilot, and then monitor the use and the cost and impact on resources. Oh, sorry.
Thanks. I mean, I agree with comments made. I was going to make the same point that Geeta made about the equalities impact assessment, which I thought was really helpful. Just the other mitigation, I thought, and there would be a small cost implication to it, but not much, was just whether we could stand up some kind of user-generated content forum, perhaps with partners or the patient engagement forum, where people could post concerns anonymously, and we would encourage the community to have that conversation and answer questions, like the kind of thing you see on Reddit and various other things. We would have to moderate that, I would think, but I don't think it's a particularly high cost to moderate those comments before they're posted. But then our communities will start to answer that themselves, rather than us determining what we think questions people have with a kind of FAQ.
Comment briefly on that. I mean, as well as the organisations in the paper, there are other organisations, peer support, online, offline, on every social media platform. And I think we have to be very careful. So the role of the HFEA, the statutory role, is to provide the information to donor-conceived individuals, their parents, and non-identifying information to donors. We hold the register, and we can, if go with option 4, we can signpost well and promote the support that's out there. Once we start into a kind of moderating role, we would be recruiting staff with different skills and experience. And I think the value that we've heard through the stakeholder roundtables and others of peer support is the value of hearing from other people, like me in that situation. I think we need to be very careful. The HFEA staff may be in that situation, but that's not why they're recruited. And we need to be very careful we're not overstepping the mark into kind of people's personal experiences. And our role is to kind of enable that information to be accessible. And I'd be wary about a moderating role personally.
So just to clarify, all I meant by moderating was just reading other people's comments before it goes online to make sure they haven't said anything potentially libelous or compromised. So sorry, that's what I mean by moderating. So might not have legs at all, but it would be up to communities to respond. Our moderating was just make sure they haven't used it to say, I think the HFEA is a load of rubbish or something, that you would just simply delete that.
Yeah, thank you so much for the paper. I wanted to come in with a slightly different opinion regarding the letterbox scheme. And I think, there are things in an ideal world which we might want to put everything in and include everything. And then we might want to think about what is feasible. And I think it's quite important to get from the Hewitt details about who uses it, why they use it, what exactly are the numbers. Because I think there is a danger that if we incorporate it into HFEA workload and put in the necessary work required to make that robust and helpful, that we will generate a demand that's not necessarily there, and thereby just overburden already, fairly overburdened HFEA staff. And I think that slightly relates to the point of moderation as well. I mean, one imagines that one reason someone might want to use the letterbox service is sort of slightly test the water before they actually, find out a donor's identity and divulge their identity to a donor, just sort of test the water in terms of that relationship. And I think it's really important that right from the outset, we have said that as the HFEA, we can't determine the nature of any relationship that results from donor-conceived children contacting their donors. And I think, in a way, especially as numbers get higher and the peer community supports one another, that's quite an important position for us to stick to, rather than maybe pouring resources into auxiliary, services that might try to ensure that we, damage limit the possibilities of those relationships, because they're going to multiply. So just as sort of a cautionary note on that.
That's an important point, it seems to me, Zainab. And it seems to me, if I take the tenor of the conversation so far, I've not heard anybody say they didn't think option 4 was a good idea. And then people have sort of, in varying degrees of trepidation, thought about 5, which sort of instinctively seems like quite a good idea, or perhaps instinctively not a good idea. And Catherine very helpfully suggested the idea of trialling it. Seems to me you might possibly turn that argument on its head, which is you could go for 4 and trial 5, or you could go for 4, see how 4 does, and see whether there's a gap that 5 might fill over time. So you sort of let the quality of 4 determine whether there's a case for moving to 5, rather than just trialling 5 and being stuck with all the sort of overheads and difficulties that you've articulated. Now, I think either's an entirely legitimate position, but I think there are options there.
Thank you. Christine. Yeah, firstly, thanks to Anna for making it easy for me to take it all in. There's such a lot of things to think about. I mean, I'm very strongly in favour of 4, and I think I kind of echo what Peter is saying, that I think 5 is probably a step too far at this point. I'm not sure that it's essential for most people. It would be very resource intensive. We're already very stretched. I think there's other areas we could spend that resource on if we were to have that extra money. So I would absolutely go with 4 and see how that goes, really. Yeah.
Anybody else would like to say anything? Jonathan.
Sorry, can I ask a question? It might be Alex, might be best place to answer. I don't know. But if you got identifying information, you wanted an anonymous conversation of the kind the letterbox had, but just doing it on your phone or something, are there ways of encrypting messages or yeah? So presumably you could do your own private letterbox version of a conversation that you could keep anonymous.
Make up an own random email address.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay. So we're perhaps not losing too much by not having the letterbox if people can just do it themselves fairly easily.
So,
I don't think we're losing too much, but we are losing, I think, the one strong point that Anna made, and that is that if we include option 5, then everything that's presently available will be available in the future, which I think is quite a strong message for us, because in a sense, by core funding the counselling up to now, we've created our own dilemma by a sort of compassionate decision in the past, which actually has courted this very problem that we're now dealing with. So I think we have some responsibility for what we've historically decided. And I'm very sympathetic to the idea that we shouldn't allow something that already exists to be lost. So I was quite taken with Catherine's idea of including it as a trial and reviewing it after a year. If it's used so little, then I think that's not significant. We don't need to promote it enormously, but I do take Zainab's point that if you promote it a lot, people might think this is the first stage of discovery that they ought to do, which could become resource intensive. I mean, it's not intended to be the first stage. It's intended for very nervous donor-conceived individuals, I think, primarily, rather than donors.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, let me try. It's a really good discussion. Excellent discussion. Thank you very much. Let me try to draw this all together. So the decision we have to make is the recommendation is for option 4 or 5 or a combination of both. I think it's probably 4 or 4 and 5. I think it's a real decision. So I think what I'm hearing, and I'd like to see it's sort of a show of hands. I think that's the easiest to make sure I'm getting it right from authority members, that 4 is a recommendation they would like to accept. But can you just, yeah. So that's, let's just see again. Right. So Gita is not happy. She is happy. And you are happy.
An option of 4 or 4 and 5.
No, at the moment, I'm just trying to, I'm not saying 4 or 4 and 5. I'm saying, are we all happy with 4 anyway, regardless? Right, okay, because that makes the discussion easier. So
1, 2, 3.
Right. So, yeah. So the answer is what we've all agreed now without any sort of controversy is that 1, 2, 3 is out, and that 4, whether or not with 5, that 4 in any event is in. Yes? Okay, Anna, so that's that. Now we come to the vexed question of 5. So, and I think there are various issues around it. Firstly, query whether or not it is our business to run such a service. I take Graham's point that we have historically run a service that, if we add in 5, would mimic, 4 and 5 would mimic. I would query whether we probably should have been running that service at all, but we were. So we're in the situation of, no point, you can't unmake the past, and so whether we should do it. However, at the moment, 15 or so applications, there's very little need. And I'm also hearing Zainab's point that, once we create this service, we might, by the very nature of doing that, generate a need that actually isn't really there. But people are thinking, well, maybe that's the way I should go because it's available, when actually they might not have done that. And there is also, I think, Alex's point, actually Jonathan's point, Alex referred to, which was you could sort of do this yourself, actually, if you wanted to. So it's tricky. I think, but what I'm thinking is, I think there are, and we can test this in a minute, I think there are a few yeses, I think there are a few no's, but there is this middle ground, which is trying it for a year in a very low-key way, without publicising it that much, over-publicising it, to see what the demand is. I also think at the very beginning that somebody did make the point, which I thought was a good point, which was perhaps we need more, maybe it's Anna actually, before we do anything, we need more information from Hewitt about exactly how this works, because it feels to me that there is a sort of piece of data that's actually missing about how this works if we were to take it on. So I'm going to propose, and if people feel there's there's another option as well, then shout back at me, that we see who's in favour absolutely, who's in favour, who's against absolutely. And perhaps I would suggest a middle way, which is, and I'm sorry about this because I know we need to get on with it, I think we should leave that issue of 5 for now while Anna gets a bit more information and does a little bit more work on how exactly it would work, with the idea that we might then want to pilot it, and that we then, and if we want to have a decision before the next meeting, which we may well want to do, I would suggest that Anna will do a short paper. It doesn't, I mean, this was great, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that we could approve it by email, just considering. So the option, the possibility of a pilot, but once we've actually, because it may be when you've got a whole lot more information, you say, well, actually, you know, we wouldn't recommend, and you'll make a recommendation. I wouldn't recommend the pilot for these reasons.
Can I just also request, please, when you're getting that information from the Hewitt, because it was quite a recent thing, could you please ask about whether it was something they wanted to put in because a person or a few people specifically requested the ability to do that, or is it an in-house idea that somebody had, just so we get a little bit of a sense of its genesis and its use? That would be really helpful.
Down.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Catherine.
Just an additional shopping list request, please. And it will be necessarily very subjective given the number, but if they have any indication of the circumstances which lead an individual to wish to use that as opposed to alternative methods or nothing, that would be very useful, particularly if it goes to the question of vulnerability and or risks arising, because that would also inform us about the likelihood of, for example, these individuals who may wish to use a letterbox service being willing and able to consider alternative email addresses and anonymous ways of contacting themselves. So I think we'd need to take that into consideration in as much as they can give us that information.
So is everybody happy with, you know, thinking of that direction of travel? So is there anybody who feels we should absolutely just go with 5? Jen, just go with 5. No. Is there anybody who thinks we absolutely shouldn't go with 5? Jonathan and Alex.
And me, I think just 4.
And Tim.
4.
And Tim. 4. Okay. And who thinks that we should do a bit more further work and look at a pilot?
I'd like to get more information, but I'm not sure I would support a pilot.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, and my view is my before this discussion, my inclination was to say, and it's probably still is, that we should only go with 4. This isn't our business. We shouldn't get into it. You know, it's not something I probably would have subscribed to some time ago. But, you know, I mean, past is the past. I don't think it's what we do. However, I think there is a general groundswell, if, you know, for Jonathan, Alex, Tim and so on, that we just look, we revisit this once we've got a bit more information. So why don't we do that? And then in the next few weeks, or as quickly as you want, send it round to us and we will have another go at either approving or not approving it, depending on what we think, with a bit more information. Was that suit everybody? And does that sound, I mean, Jonathan, is that okay? Does that sound okay? You know? So, Anna, is that okay with you?
Sounds good, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
But in the meantime, yes to ploughing on with 4.
Yes.
4's happening regardless.
But 4's happening.
The only issue is whether or not to tack on some element of 5.
Yeah, exactly.
And establish that position as quick and soon.
And we should establish that. I mean, I think if I could ask members to commit that once Anna's ready to ask us the question, we look at it as quickly as we can and get back to her pretty quickly, because we need to get on with this. And I realise that, we are delaying it a little bit, even though for good reason. Yeah. Okay, Anna, you happy with that?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and a great piece of work. Thank you. Good. Right, moving on to the public bodies review. As everybody is acutely aware, we at the back end of 2023 had during 2023 had the public bodies review, and actually the results were published in November. It was actually a very positive outcome for us. And was made sort of pleasing reading, that there were a few recommendations for improvements as you would expect. And what we need to do today is Peter and Claire are going to take us through a presentation which shows some of our responses to the recommendations, and we need to approve them and agree a timeline for carrying them out. Yep.
Thanks very much, Julia. Yes, we'll do a quick double header. I'll sort of set the scene and make some general points, and Claire will take you through the detailed recommendations. So, and I'm conscious in many respects, given this is a public meeting, much of what I'm going to say is for the wider public rather than members, because you'll all been quite well cited on it. But so the public body review programme is a fairly recent thing for this particular government, but the idea that public bodies should be reviewed has been in place for quite a long time, as became clear. This particular programme was announced back in 2022, and all departments, so this isn't just a sort of particular thing for the Department of Health and Social Care, are expected to conduct regular reviews of all their arm's length bodies, and they do those in a kind of programme. And we just appeared in the programme in a particular order. So this is a review not driven by a particular desire to look at the HFEA at precisely this time. Fundamentally, the reviews are about issues of things like effectiveness and efficiency rather than anything else. But they do typically also ask a prior question, which is, should this body continue to exist? Because, of course, it's entirely possible that a body that was set up in a particular circumstances some years ago, that particular task no longer needs to be done, and there is no reason why any particular public body should just exist for the sake of existing it. The HFEA, as the paper makes clear, has been reviewed on a number of occasions, most recently in 2017. This review started off in February of last year and was published in November 2023, and this is the first opportunity we've been able to talk about any of the details in public. And broadly, it is a very positive assessment of the performance of the HFEA. There's a couple of quotes on those slides, one of which about what we do and one of which about how we do it. Talks about the HFEA performing important functions regulating a discrete and specialised area of medical practice and scientific research, which can raise sensitive clinical, legal and ethical issues, as today's discussion and indeed any authority meeting usually demonstrates. And it then goes on to say also some nice, some complimentary things about the quality of the organisation itself. Small, highly experienced and capable executive management team, sport chair and members, effectiveness of the HFEA dependent on the breadth and skills and experience its members bring, as well as the quality of support they receive from the management team. So, having read plenty of these things over the years, that's about as positive as these things get. So I think, all of the staff and you as a board can draw great comfort from that. Shabir, if you can move this on. So as I've already said, our public bodies review focuses on economy, effectiveness and efficiency. That is, there is a fourth category in these reviews called governance, but the review didn't look into that because it concluded from the earlier scoping work that governance was not an area that needed to be looked at. What was unusual about our review is it did also look at our proposals for law reform. That's merely an accident of timing. It's not there in the design of the review. It is just rather that given that we had that work ongoing, and given that inevitably they were looking at the broader framework in which we undertake our decisions, there was some reason for looking at that, and as Claire will say later on, it generally drew a very positive view about our proposals for law reform. There are 19 recommendations in all. Because public bodies reviews are not just about the body under review, but about the relationship with the parent department, 5 of those recommendations are principally for the department itself. And as Julia said, just by way of introduction, this is, if you like, our first opportunity to not only say in public what the recommendations are, but for you to agree our proposed responses to those recommendations. The department have made it clear to us that as part of their accountability arrangements with us, and as you probably heard, we meet with them on a quarterly basis, what are called quarterly accountability reviews, then our progress on the public body review recommendations will be part of that discussion. So that's what I wanted to say by means of introduction. And Claire is just going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour through the 19 recommendations. Sorry.
So shall I just go through and as sort of pause after each one in case? So I mean, there's nothing really to say about the first one. That's a good recommendation. Meeting closed now. In terms of the second one, this is a kind of view that we should learn more from other regulators in the UK and overseas. Our response is that, where appropriate, we do that, although we find much of the international regulation of fertility treatment is more a nod to kind of learning from us. And, we recently talked to people from Ireland, Israel and Japan, and that was just in kind of the period of a few weeks. However, it's not to say that there is not a lot we can learn both from UK and overseas regulators. And Rachel and I just had a meeting with the CQC yesterday to talk about things like that. So I think we say that ongoing as resources allow and priorities, and kind of if anyone ever has suggestions of people who we should talk to or learn from, then we're very open to that. Okay. The next one is about the the increase, the fee increase for 24-25, which the authority agreed in November 2023. And as Tom said, we're still waiting approval from the Treasury. Noted. And then the fourth one we also talked about earlier on, that we had planned a few years ago to have a bigger fee review model, a bigger review of the fee model, but we delayed that during the COVID pandemic. But as we've referred to earlier on, that will start later this business year. Okay, so the next one relates to the department working with all ALBs on shared services, which is an ongoing piece of work where, about to say the department's looking at what ALBs can do with shared services on, whether there's more they can be shared about things like procurement or IT services. We're contributing on as we're asked for information, and that's ongoing. Next one relates to PRISM, about reviewing the efficiency of it, which is something that we would plan to do once those final pieces of PRISM are complete. The final tools relating to opening the register and the Choose a Fertility Clinic, as we heard earlier, that will be complete late this calendar year. So this is something, if you could just go off a section, if this is something that we plan to do for 25-26. It's just skipped one.
Move on back, should we? Thanks.
So that's on PRISM. The next one is for the department, but just to note, there were some concerns raised in the review about patients travelling overseas for fertility treatment, including at the time and ongoing. There was just a sad story yesterday or the day before that in many different health sectors, people are travelling overseas, whether it's for dental treatment or fertility treatment or others, and there are risks to the UK Health Service of that. That's really something for the government, we think, to take forward, although we're very unclear how this could happen given the lack of NHS funding in the UK, that we know that the majority of patients, the reasons they're travelling abroad are they're hoping to get cheaper treatment. So we're unclear how that could be done, but we're very happy to contribute anything we can if asked.
Thank you. I've had this, first of all, a really great response, as we have discussed before. But for this number 7, where we say, given the cost of treatment in the UK for the majority of patients, it's unclear how this could be reduced. Do you not think we are clear that if the government actually provided full funding to patients, then we would reduce it? Could we not explicitly say that rather than saying unless there's a shift in policy? No.
Sorry.
Oh.
I think you're right that that's what we are saying, but perhaps we've worded it rather clumsily. So the primary reason that people are travelling abroad is cost. It's not the only reason. So there's an availability, particularly of egg donors for certain patients for ethnic minorities, and also some people are actively seeking egg donation from abroad with the assumption that it remains anonymous. But the primary reason, anecdotally, because we don't collect the evidence, is that it's for cost. So perhaps we can make that clearer. Okay, so moving on to number 8. So over the next 18 months, the HFEA should evaluate the PRISM data it holds with the aim of improving use of technology and data. So our response is that this is something that we are hoping and planning to do anyway. We talked a bit about data dashboards earlier in the meeting, both internal, external one, and together with replacing Epicenter, our inspection and licensing tool, we hope to be able to do quite a lot more with the data we hold to enhance our risk-based inspection.
Yeah, I felt on this one our response didn't quite answer the recommendation, and lots of trends around risk-based inspection. I did a lot of work in that as part of mid-staffs. Do you use data to give people inspection holidays and so on? It's gone on CQC, Ofsted, etc. So I actually thought we were ambitious to say starting in 24-25, and that that would potentially be a bigger piece of work that then might expand into how we do inspections, consistency of inspection findings, and so on. So I kind of felt with that one, personally, it should be a bigger discussion, that we could take a decision to put that in the business plan for 25, 26 or 26, 27 or not, and kind of do it comprehensively, as it were.
We have always used register data to help inform inspections, and that ceased when PRISM was developed. So we do want to go ahead and use the information we've got in PRISM in a more intelligent way now. And the data dashboards, have been incredibly well received by the sector, and I think the inspectors will be able to glean very good evidence-based data, which will help them inform their inspection. But the problem is we are bound by the legislation that we are in at the moment, that we have to physically inspect a premise every 2 years. With legislation reform, hopefully we would be able to move away from that system, and we would then be able to use data a lot more intelligently and frequently to be able to help inform frequency of the inspection and the type of inspection. So I think this is definitely longer term as well, but there's some more immediate work that we can do now, but it will be based on what happens with legislation.
Perhaps what we could do, Alex, because I think your broader point is spot on, we could just slightly revisit that response to make clear, as Rachel said, the first task in this is, if you like, building back the using data within the framework we've got. But you're right, the bigger question then is, okay, you're there, let's assume you've got some legislative freedom. How do you want to do different? And you say, I think that is a bigger piece of work. So we can sort of make that as almost like a 2-part piece of work and adjust the timings accordingly, if that works for you.
Okay, so next one we've got relates to this. So the review team had some really helpful conversations with our professional and patient stakeholders, and I think there was some feedback there that the code of practice was a long document. We have done some work into this over the last few years. We did a clinic survey. We'd worked with our license centre panel to ask for views of the code of practice. And at that point, we made a decision to kind of keep it in the current format, which is a PDF, which is not ideal. And we would like that to change, as well as kind of wider work on the code of practice as and when there's legislative reform, which potentially, I'm not sure whether it means start from scratch or kind of a massive edit. It depends, I guess, the scale of legislative reform. So I think there's two parts to that. One is a future code of practice dependent on law reform. And the second is the how the code of practice kind of looks and feels and the accessibility, which is something we would like to work on. But we'd have to have significant both financial time to convert it from PDF to something better, as well as staff capacity to do that. So that's why we've said it is something we'd like to do, but as resources allow. But Tim's got his hand up.
Yeah, I take in the response there, I would completely agree with where you've written discussions with the centre panel stakeholder group suggest the current style acceptable and depth of content supported. I mean, I know it's a big document, but I actually find it very, very useful because whilst it's got interpretation of the Act there, it's got the actual original wording from the Act. I think having a sort of more of an idiot's guide and slimming it right down, okay, it might be easier to get through it, but it would lose a lot as well.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point as Tim, really. As an acting person responsible, I haven't actually had too many difficulties with the code of practice, I have to admit, and I would much rather have everything than a slimmed down sort of idiot's guide. So I think you're doing the right thing, sort of not prioritising that for the moment.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So I think moving on to number 10. Obviously I know by heart, which is so this is relating to our legislative reform proposals, which you'll remember there's one sort of which is kind of important for us in the sector, but probably less from a kind of public point of view, that the law should enable there to be a deputy person responsible, or deputies, which it doesn't at the moment. And of course, we agree with the recommendation that we would review that should law reform come up. So I think it's as and when we are in more deeper discussions with the government about law reform is when we would look at that. Okay. All right. So add-ons. So again, this is something that there's been ongoing discussions, particularly at SCAC, about whether the current situation where we collect very little data on add-ons on our register should be changed. You'll remember that prior to PRISM being introduced, there was long engagement with the sector, and at the time, the sector and professional bodies felt very much that the less data the HFEA should collected is better. We may have moved away from that, and the Authority have discussed previously in relation to add-ons that now the add-ons are embedded, the new add-ons rating system is embedded. Something that SCAC and us together with the professional bodies could discuss is some sort of voluntary data collection system that we could perhaps enable but possibly not be responsible for. So I think that's something that we have been talking about, but is not likely to happen until next financial year 25-26, because of the completion of PRISM. Okay. So our digital capability, so I suppose this is a part of wider discussion about ALB communities and shared resources, that some of the bigger ALBs like NHS England or CQC might have huge teams that we could lean on, but is there anything that we have that other ALBs could lean on us? And I guess that's a conversation that's part of those working group discussions that primarily Peter takes part in, with the department overseeing this shared services work with all the health ALBs. Okay. This was something about how there was a discussion in the Public Bodies Review report about our social media reach. And I think what I've said here before is that given the resources we have, we think we do a fairly good job, although obviously there's always more to be done. The suggestion here is that the department could perhaps support us more, and I would that would be fantastic, but I imagine the department's quite stretched as well. So I think we continue to look for ways, given the resources we have, to reach wider and new audiences. And beyond having many more resources, and primarily that would be financial resources relating to social media and marketing. I'm not sure how much further we can go with that one.
Claire, I think we didn't quite do 12.
Oh, sorry. Right, sorry, I had to completely slip, but I think I probably covered that as part of the priorities for the 24-25 business plan. So yes, we absolutely think there's a discussion to be had about synthetic tissues and embryo-like models. There's a number of different groups who are looking at potentially regulatory guidelines or principles. We're in discussions or on various working groups with most of those, and we'll continue to work with the department on kind of what the next step is on that. Okay, so working with NHS England. So I think the view of the Public Bodies Review is that NHS England in England are kind of in charge of health services, and therefore we should probably have a much closer relationship. The reality is that we're UK-wide, so NHS England doesn't cover Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And in England, over 60, many parts of England, well over 70% of patients maybe have paying for treatment to have in NHS clinics, or that any NHS patients having treatment in private clinics. So actually working with NHS England covers kind of quite a discrete part of our work. However, in better news, we do have a fairly good relationship with NHS England. Rachel's worked with them on looking at whether if there's any crossover on incidents that need to be reporting and risks. We also have a quarterly meeting with the relevant team within NHS England to have oversight of the fertility sector at a strategic level. So I think which has been very helpful, and Steve Pugh from the department has been very helpful in making those introductions, and we'll continue to collaborate as and when things arise.
I think this is a very interesting one because, and I could be overreading it, but it seems to me that implicit in that recommendation is an encouragement for us not simply to collaborate, but actually be a catalyst for change, and a change not only within a narrow understanding of the fertility sector, but on wider women's health priorities. And I do think that that's worth embracing and saying that it's something that we are actively thinking about apropos of development of the next strategy. I mean, it doesn't, I don't think we should commit ourselves to anything, but I do see it as quite a strong encouragement to the kind of, I think it was referred to this morning, cultural change, which actually we've begun to trigger with using our voice. So I'd like to see a little more in the response to reflect that.
I would actually support what Catherine just said. I think we should really make a comment on women's health priorities and what we can do, and particularly not just our voice, but our data.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, just to add in, I think it ties in with people going overseas for treatment. It could tie in about the funding within England. So having a discussion that ties in two of these points together might be quite helpful to see that we're working actively to encourage funding on a more national basis.
I've made this point before, and I've been slightly tangential, but crowbarring it in here because I think, as I've said before, we should have a closer relationship with Genomics England as well. And I suppose a question for you, Julia, that while it's going on at official to official level, I just wonder, with some of these organisations, would it be worth having some kind of relationship at board to board level? And I would certainly give some time to build relationships with the equivalent of authority members at some of the organisations we've talked today, and I suspect other authority members would as well. And whether that's another route to keeping those relationships, I certainly think we should with Genomics England, for example, because we have very similar, although it's very different, obviously pre-birth, post-birth. In some ways, we have very, some of the stuff we talk about at SAC, Genomics England are grappling with some similar thoughts around, genomics post birth. So I'd be happy to volunteer for give some time, and I'm sure others will as well.
Jason first, and Catherine. Sorry, I'm looking.
Yeah, just picking up on Alison's point, really, in terms of raising awareness of the health economic benefits of actually offering more IVF nationally. It's whether or not we can leverage our relationship with NHS England to do that, really. I think there's value there if we can.
Also, just picking up on Alison's point, I think that we might, in our response, also reflect and repeat our concern more generally about inequalities in this sector, whether it's funding postcode inequalities or whether it's ethnicity inequalities. So it would be nice to be able to use this recommendation to build on our desire to push that point.
Anyone else?
Thanks, that's really helpful. So this is a slightly technical point that whether any of our proposals for law reform could be made through secondary legislation rather than primary legislation, and whether we could be also designated as an enforcer of consumer law. And I think this is for something for kind of more detailed discussions with the department as we go on the road for law reform. Okay. And then we get to the bits that are not for us. So there used to be this kind of annual meeting between the chief exec and the chair and the relevant minister, which have sort of gone by the wayside. And the recommendation is to reinstate them, which I think the department is pursuing. Our sponsorship team is very small and specialised. I suppose there's some concern, due to sickness or turnover or anything else. And lastly, the recommendation about coordinating responses. There was a particular time, which seems to have actually slightly subsided now, where you sort of couldn't breathe for very urgent requests from different parts of the department, and there was a lack of coordination, which meant that we were sort of often answering similar requests from different parts of DHSC. I should say that does seem to have either disappeared or improved, but that's certainly something for the department rather than for us. So I think that's about covers it.
Thank you, Claire. That was a very helpful discussion. Thanks for everybody participation. I do particularly endorse this idea of getting closer to the women's health strategy and just generally considering, women's health issues, us as part of women's health issues generally, which I think we do. The issue with all of these things is they're lovely to have. They require work and resource, and it's a matter of juggling. But as headlines, I think it's really important, and there are things we can do. We can't at all. I think we should. And thank you. I think just again worth noting that this was a reasonably time-intensive and at times somewhat brutal process. And Peter and Claire and Rachel and everybody who was involved really deserves our huge thanks. And also I would like to thank authority members who also participated in interviews and so on, because in the end we got to a good result. And I think you'll be very pleased with how it turned out. It was somewhat time consuming at the time. So the decision is we are asked to discuss the proposed responses to the review. The decision is we should discuss the proposed responses to the review and the recommendations, which I think we've just done, and agree a timeline for any relevant actions. Well, they're sort of ongoing, or I mean that's it, isn't it? Okay, so I'm basically we're just happy with what's proposed.
We will revise the responses as you said. Yes.
Right, fine, thank you. Great. That's a very helpful couple of discussions. Thank you, and very important for us to manage the next few months. Any other business?
Adrian and I thought Peter and Claire and everyone. The clap. Oh,
definitely. Any other business apart from that for anybody else? No. Thanks everybody very much, and we will see each other again in March. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, Jim.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye. Bye.